You're such a source for all of us. You are the source field. Thank you. So with that, let's welcome David Wilcock. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do in the world.
We've decided that the dog is actually going to do the talk today. Tell us what you want to say, buddy. So that's the message right there. That's it.
And the talk today is preparing for ascension. So I just wish you all an amazing, incredible journey with David Wilcock.
All right. How's everybody doing? How do you feel? Awesome. I'm liking that energy a lot. Well, I'm really enthusiastic. I'm just going to clear my workspace here. So you know how I love to pace. You've seen my videos. You're like, I'm all over the place. Wow, this is going to be an ambitious one. I came up with some really amazing breakthroughs in my research when I was at Conscious Life Expo. And this literally occurred over the weekend. I'd already been lecturing on ascension, and I was looking at some of the concepts that I was talking about, and I realized that there was some very major metaphysical relations between scientific data that I had and ancient prophecies that I had not captured before. And so what I'm going to be doing now is, in order to sort of get you ready for the deeper levels of information that are going to be conveyed here, I'm going to give you a scientific initiation. And that's one of the things I do best, is to not just have you take my word for it. Because even if, I mean, obviously everybody here has raised their hand. You're all Gaia members. You've all read my books. So this is actually great, because you guys have done the work. You're already scholars. You're already familiar with what I'm doing. So you will be able to appreciate this. Because even if you don't know what I'm already doing, you're still going to be able to understand this, because I always run it that way. I'm not assuming anything. It's not like you're barging in on a calculus class. But if you have already studied my material and watched all my shows, you're going to get even more out of this than you would otherwise, because so many dots are going to connect. So I've combined 3 different talks that I gave, and some of you may have seen all of them, but even still, it's the combination and getting it into 3 hours and doing it here and what I know now and the energy of this weekend is going to make it totally unique. So what I wanted to say is that we need to break down the conditioning that the mainstream scientific models have given us. Now, even if you have read my books and you watch the show, you may still fall into this conditioning, because it is a philosophical belief system that totally affects every aspect of how we think. And I am happy that I have actually finished this book. I only finished it the last big screaming deadline, because every time the publisher works with me, it's like a screaming deadline. It's never easy. It's just jump and run and drop everything. You know, that's how this works. So the Ascension Mysteries is, the first half of the book is a personal odyssey of what I've done to get to where I am now, and how I ended up going through recovery from marijuana addiction. When I was 19 years old is when I actually got sober. And then the second half of the book, and I talk about the spiritual entities that like guided me through this. Then the second half of the book is actually the full disclosure in a box. It's like all of the best stuff that all of the different insiders have told me, all crammed together. And that includes a 500,000-year history of the Cabal. These people who are our planetary elite controllers do appear to be the long-lost descendants of a race that blew up another planet in our solar system that's now the asteroid belt. So those people blew up their planet, destroyed Mars in the process, because Mars was a captured moon of that planet, and they were both watery. They both had oceans and rivers and streams and life. And then those people migrated to the moon, or they were inside. Actually, they were already inside the moon. They migrated to the surface of the moon because the interior became unlivable due to the damage from the asteroids. And then eventually they got attacked on the surface of the moon, and they migrated to the surface of the Earth, which I think was not a good place for them to go because of the Draco. So this is really the context of this cosmic battle between good and evil that's going on. I've gone through this stuff throughout the weekend. We're not really going to get into a whole lot of the material in this book, But I just want to point out that there's a lot of ancient knowledge about ascension that's in there, and I'm going to cover some of that in this talk from ancient scriptures and stuff like the Law of One. So this little animation is just intended to illustrate for you how ridiculous science is right now. We have been hypnotized by this mass media control, this indoctrination, to think that the only way you can understand anything that's really going on in the universe is to know all this stuff. And then that stuff is impenetrable. You have to get an advanced PhD degree to even understand one subset of this mathematics, okay? And this is the mathematics of how matter is, how the energy of the universe works. What is it? How does it flow? How does it function? Where does it come from? How does it behave? So they tell you it's just like the priesthood all over again. You can't know this stuff. It's not yours to know. So what I'm saying is that we can actually look at things that are not mathematical equations and discover some very intrinsic points. The universe is alive. Now, some of this stuff, you've all seen my show on Gaia. Some of you may, I can't remember if all of these slides are in the show yet or not, so some of this might be new for you, some of it might be repeat, but it's like you don't go to a Fleetwood Mac concert to hear all original songs, right? You know you're going to get some things that you love, but you like to hear the interpretation of the music. So that's part of what we're doing here. So as most of you now know, I've proven that DNA cannot hold all the information that is necessary to make life. Here's your DNA molecule, and we can see how it actually winds up into the chromosomes. And this is the code that can be spliced and used to recreate one life form. Now, in the conventional model, it is believed that the DNA has everything to make life, and that even like if you have a freckle on your face, that's in your DNA. They think consciousness is all based on genes in the DNA. I'm going to decisively prove this is not true. So the Human Genome Project, by about the year 2000, had made these conclusions. The human body has 70 to 90,000 proteins. These are the things that make the tissues in your body, the basic building blocks. So there's like a particular protein that would be the fascia around your liver. Like there's a particular liver coating protein, as one example. There's lots of them. There's 90,000. Until the year 2000, scientists believed there must be at least one gene, one specific chunk of DNA, to build each of these 70 to 90,000 proteins. It would make sense, so they thought, because it was a gene-based model. They also believed that we had another 30,000 genes to regulate cell growth and behavior, to create awareness, emotion, and intelligence. Now that's pretty silly in and of itself, because genes are not really that complex. And they're thinking that you're only going to need 30,000 genes to make intelligence? This is very, very bizarre. So what we found out that shocked everybody, it's like getting pantsed. You know that, when they pull your pants down? Only 34,000. You know there's got to be some inappropriate jokes if you're going to do a David Wilcock talk. It's going to happen. Only 34,000 genes in the human genome. So that means that there's not even enough to build 1/3 of the proteins in your body, and there's nothing left over for intelligence. So look, the scientists just got pantsed. This is the proof right here. Now, then we got this little guy with the big nasty name, Caenorhabditis elegans, which is a primitive worm that is widely studied in scientific laboratories, and its body is composed of exactly 969 cells. So that's not very many. And they did a genetic analysis of this, and I want you to start thinking, oh, please don't film, okay? Yeah. If anybody else is doing that, you will be publicly shamed. Test. Okay. Audio? Oh, boom. There we go. All right, yeah, I mean, I can't guarantee if somebody films it that they don't get struck with passion and want to put it online, which is actually bad. We don't want those, single camera angle, low audio quality videos going all over the internet. Okay, thanks. So anyway, it has a body composed of exactly 969 cells, and it has a brain. Its entire brain system is about 302 organized cells. So think about this in terms of what do you think might happen when they analyze this worm's DNA. So they know exactly how many cells are in its body. It's that tiny. The human body, by comparison, has 50. See, we're just going to keep going. Screw it. I'm not going to let this knock me down. Doesn't really smell that good. I will just say that. It doesn't smell like beer and cigarettes, though. That's good. Not like the Billy Joel song Piano Man, right? The microphone smells like a beer. Now you're getting to experience what I experience up here. It's a little bit of mind sharing. Okay, so this gene model, the human body has 50+ trillion cells. And how many genes do you think they found in the Caenorhabditis? 24,000. Now, the human body only has 34,000. So I just pantsed the scientists again, right? Because the bottom line is you can't go in here and say that genes are responsible for the building of the body. But that's what everybody thinks. It's another example of an advanced scientific mind control that has stripped any type of intelligence out of the equation of how life comes together. And then the other interesting thing is that the fruit fly, which is technically more complex as an organism than the little roundworm, only has 15,000 genes, which is even less. The human body only has 10,000 more genes than the simplest, humblest organism scientists have found. It's more than just a single-celled microbe. So everything we think we know is wrong. Yeah, if everybody could just turn their ringers off, that'll help to distract the AI so it doesn't keep giving us these technical malfunctions, like with my microphone. So then this is really cool, too, and this is so important. I really hope you can grasp this. I know if you watched my show long ago, you might have seen this, but it's so valuable that I want to reiterate it. In 1984, Gariev and Poponin took a quartz container and put a piece of DNA inside it, and they were studying the amount of light that was going on inside that room. So what they did is they would take a laser, they zap it into the room, and if they don't put DNA in the room, if they just leave the room the way it is, they see photons appearing all over the room. They're evenly distributed. If they take the DNA molecule and they put that in the room, then the DNA acts like a miniature black hole. Now, what does a black hole's gravity do to light? It actually bends the path of light. It can gravitationally attract light. So DNA actually absorbs light. And that's been scientifically proven. Now, wait a minute. Shouldn't that imply that there is something really important about this behavior that we need to know about for human health? Doesn't that imply that the light-absorbing factor of DNA is critical to our health? All the photons in the room are absorbed into the DNA, and here's the actual photograph that shows you how this works. If you look at the top, you've got the existing empty space if there's no DNA in the room, and all those dots represent individual photons. Now, what you're seeing in the graph below is that curving line is actually where the DNA molecule is. That's the double helix. And every single dot now falls inside the DNA. The DNA has absorbed every single dot of light in the room. Nothing is left. What the heck is doing this? How is this possible? Already, we are dealing with energies and fields that cannot be explained in mainstream science. We got something new, something different, something exciting, something that changes everything. And I want you to think about the idea that your DNA is storing this light right now. In fact, we know there's approximately 10,000 photons stored in each DNA molecule. And when the DNA is killed by certain chemicals like ethylene dibromide, the photons go flying out. We also know that the equivalent amount of photons in the kind of vegetables that you're going to eat are 100,000 photons per square centimeter, unlike the skin that gives off 10,000 photons per square centimeter. So there's a lot more light in the food if you have the right kind of food. A friend of mine was saying, I wonder if it's going to be cold in the room. I said, I don't think so. We got the fans already going here. Not even 20 minutes in. So, no, we don't have to worry about AC hotel chill. This is contact in the desert. Flop sweat is a regular phenomenon at this conference. Let's see. Did I just do that? Wow. Man, it's been a long frickin' week. It's been a long week. Okay. That's the experimental setup where they did this. So what you got here is the cuvette is the container. And originally they shined the laser in through the collimator. That just focuses the beam. All the photons in there. If there's no DNA, they're all over the place. You stick DNA in, then they can count each individual photon, and they run it into the computer, and that's how they found out that DNA absorbs light. So now I want to give you a really, really interesting concept that turns everything upside down. And again, if you're a fan of my material, you read the books, you already know this, but there's only so much cool shit I can say, and this is one of them. And we really need to get this through because it's totally valuable to the ascension idea. What if the light is actually more important than the DNA? In other words, what if the DNA is just like a cool house, but then the people who live in the house are actually the ones that are running the show? That the people who live in the house are your intelligence, and they're the ones that have all the blueprints on how to build your body. And it's just like, if you build it, they will come. So if you build the right house, if you have the right DNA lattice framework, then those people, to use the analogy of light, those people will always come to that house. They say, this is where we belong. But they have the information. So this is where it gets so bizarre. And we have to look at the data. So if you remember the Budakovsky things, one of my all-time favorites, this is where a hologram was made of a healthy raspberry plant. So they took a holographic picture of it, which means the hologram is going to include all of the DNA data in it. It's going to include the actual structure of the DNA in the hologram. Then what they do is they take a tumor, a cancerous growth, and they zap it with that hologram from the healthy plant. Now, tumors, if you get a tumor in your body, what is the medical establishment going to tell you they have to do? Just slice that sucker out. That's useless tissue. There's nothing you can do with it. Here's what a raspberry tumor looks like. It's nasty. Now, what they found was that when they zapped it, the callus, this little tumor, developed into a healthy raspberry plant. They actually rewrote the code of the DNA. What did this? The only answer could possibly be that the vibrational signature of the light was in the hologram. And this becomes very important when we start looking at the idea that the universe is a hologram. Modern biology obviously has no explanation for this. The Russians have done tons of different things like this, and it's all been swept under the rug. So you go from this nasty thing over here to perfectly healthy fruiting raspberry plants. Furthermore, the Budakovsky study has vast theoretical and practical implications because what it tells us is that the entire genetic code can be enfolded into a single photon of light. Now, the photon itself is much, much larger than the smallest size particles that science has identified. That's really important. The smallest particles, as we're going to see in a minute here, are called Planck's constant, and that's 10 to the minus 34 centimeters. In comparison to that, a photon is the size of a planet. It's huge. And that's what I just said right here. The photons are much larger than Planck's constant. This means that there's lots of room for actual structure inside the photon. We just think the photon is dumb light. It's not true at all. The universe is built to be extremely information dense. Light contains information. The information contains density. And I know there's probably nothing we could do about it, but if it's possible that we could get the air conditioning turned up more, we already got like about 10 people fanning themselves. And remember, I'm like 10 feet higher than you guys up here. So whatever you're feeling, just amplify that. Oh, now they're all doing it, right? How are we doing over there? Can you get it down? Oh, it's working its magic. Okay. Thanks. See if we can do something with this. This dog is like making an aggressive move. He said, I want to be on that microphone. Why didn't you give me more of a chance? Well, you only could say one thing. That's the problem. So I call this digital biology. I say that DNA is written into the background energy of space and time itself. Einstein is one of the scientists who said that the whole universe is built of photons. Okay? The photons have information density, and a lot of information density. They are rich with information. That's really cool because you can rewrite the genetic code with it. Now, I want to talk to you about psychic vampires. I had a little soiree I went to last night, and while I was there, I was describing to people how one of the reasons why I actually avoided conferences I took like 5 years off, was because every now and then there would be somebody there who would actually follow me around and be very pushy and wouldn't actually disengage, and other people would try to talk to me, and they would interrupt those new people and try to keep talking, and they do this over and over again. And I'm a really, really nice guy, or at least I used to be, before I had to learn how to deal with this. And you try to be nice, and they just never stop. And they'll go on for an hour, and they'll follow you around, and you try to tell them, look, I really need privacy, and they just keep going and going and going. And then every time I allowed this to happen, I would come home, and I would be sick for a week, lying there in bed, dying, every single time. And I eventually became, I don't want to go to conferences because I don't want to lose 2 weeks of productivity. And then I learned, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to prevent some of this from happening. So now I got a man with a frickin' gun. Why doesn't anybody else at the conference have a guy with a gun? Because they're not David Wilcock. Boom, that's that. Wow, I just lowered my IQ by about 30 points. This is going to blow your doors off. If you haven't seen this, how many of you know what I'm about to say? Okay, about half, maybe less. That's good. So that means you don't all know everything. I'm actually teaching you something. That's awesome. Okay. This study is so huge because it shows that the light is the paramount thing that is so important. So what we got here is a fish egg that has now gotten probably 3/4 of the way towards forming a fish. It's living off of that yolk sac, but it's already got its tail inside. And you can see the eye is quite prominent. So this is a reasonably mature fish egg. But when they first get started, eggs just have this little thing called a germ spot, and it's mostly just yolk and fluid. So what Wilcock did is he took a slide, and he puts this slide between two rooms. The slide is in the middle. That's that little dotted area that you see there. So the room on the top has fish eggs in it, and the room on the bottom has fish eggs in it. And the only optical way that photons can pass between them is with, oh, I just did a mouth smack. I was trying to never do that, and I just did one. That's when I try to never say or like or well or or the thing is that. And I try to not do mouth smacks, and I just did one. I'm so anal retentive about this stuff. Well, the thing is that on the bottom, let's say we have eggs that are young. There's just a germ spot there. We don't have any of a more developed embryo. And then let's say that the eggs on the top are actually reasonably far along, like I just showed you in the photograph. Here's where it gets really, really strange. If you put a piece of permeable material that allows ultraviolet light to go through in between the two rooms so that the photons from one side can zoom over to the other side, because photons are always happening, then what happens is that the stronger eggs actually absorb the life force out of the weaker eggs, and the weaker eggs literally die. They weaken, they wither, and they die. They don't all die, but they shrivel up. It's as if there is a stronger magnetic force coming out of the eggs on the top than the eggs on the bottom, and that's why fish will naturally lay their eggs separate from each other. Nature is doing this automatically. The other weird thing is that if you put a slide in the middle that is not permeable to ultraviolet light, that blocks the photons, then the cells do not weaken and die. They're totally fine. They grow just as well as they always would. So when you double-click on this, the implication is, okay, we're doing this to each other. We can absorb this light that is stored in our DNA. If you could actually measure how many photons each DNA molecule in your body is holding on to, if you could count if there's 10,000, and you get a whole like diagram of this, then we know that as you are attacked by someone, what's one of the things that happens to your posture when somebody starts yelling at you and trying to shame you? What happens to your posture? What do? Right? This is actually like the squeezing of the DNA. It's the milking of your energy. This is your vitality. There's people who feed on this stuff, such as the Draco. This is the source of the loosh. That's the scientific proof that there are beings out there living on negative energy. Because when you feel negative energy, your body releases a surge for its own protection. And one of the other pieces of research that I've had in a lot of my talks is that there's a natural survival mechanism we have where we send our photons to the alpha male at the front of the cave who's defending the tribe. So if you are the hero, if you can get that adulation and that respect from people, oh yeah, soaking it up, baby. Then what happens is, sure enough, that alpha male will actually be strengthened. He'll actually do better in battle. He'll fight better. This is why sports teams do better at the home stadium. Because the team is sending them love, and that love actually pumps them up. And this gets right back into the energetic dynamics of a healthy, sacred relationship in which each person is feeding the other energy, and there's a circuit that is formed. So in the ideal healthy relationship, energy is not lost, it is being replenished. We also know that there's healing research that's been done that proves scientifically that people can heal each other's DNA, even across the coast from California to New York. There have been DNA healing studies. One of my ex-girlfriends actually was involved in one of these studies of psychic healing. And she had a photograph of a woman who had a really nasty stage 4 brain cancer, and her job was to try to heal this woman's brain cancer. We never got the results of what happened because it's a double-blind study, but she was participating in that, and 64% of these type of healing studies showed a positive result. So then when you look at the controlled mainstream media, they'll point out one of the 36% of the studies that didn't work. And they'll say, oh, it's been scientifically proven healing doesn't work. So what's really happening is that we can create portals with our mind. Every time we think about a person, we are sending, there is a portal that is created to that person through what you could call this source field. The portal is created when we focus on somebody and we start sending our lights, our little lights of photons through that pipeline to that person. So this is why, for example, it's been scientifically proven the sense of being stared at is real. They've actually had people in the laboratory sit there and think they're supposed to take a test, and then they'll have someone look at them on a closed-circuit television. The closed-circuit television image is only done by a hidden camera. The person in the room doesn't know that they're on camera. But what happens is the person who is in the room where they see the closed-circuit TV picture of this person is told at random that normally they're just supposed to be looking down and blanking out their mind. And then at certain points, they look at the person on the camera image and they stare intensely at them. And what they found very consistently was that while those people are being stared at, all kinds of physiological measurable responses in their body show excitation, fight or flight reflex, which consciously we don't necessarily understand. We have lost touch with our animal instincts, so we don't necessarily perceive that something is going to happen or that something is happening. But, right, you feel that. And then you look, and sure enough, somebody's looking at you. Okay, that's been scientifically proven because as they look at you, they create this tube of energy, and then photons start going through the tube. So if they send healing energy to you, they could actually send healing photons. So when I was at these conferences, and I've, learned how to avoid this, and I do it very politely. I've really had to learn the polish over 20 years. So that stuff doesn't happen anymore. But what was happening is this person will actually find some kind of, we do have energy fields, so you'll have a wound, you'll have some kind of energetic rip in your energy field, and then they will actually create a tube that goes into that hole and starts to withdraw photons out of your energy field. And they're actually draining you of your health and vitality. But there's the opposite side, and this very chipper-looking man is Dr. Glenn Ryan. Now, if there was anyone on Earth who I believe is the reincarnation of Albert Einstein, it's Glenn Ryan. Look at the face and tell me you don't see it. This is the same guy. Albert Einstein was a breakthrough scientist, but his work was co-opted negatively and turned into a nuclear bomb that could destroy the whole planet. So he wanted to come back. In my estimation, that soul wanted to come back and do something that could only possibly be used for good, and that's exactly what occurred. His breakthrough discovery shows that love heals tissue, and he has absolute proof that it does. Here's how he proved it. You take undifferentiated cells from a human placenta, which means just they're not something anybody wants. They normally just get discarded. Then you put those cells in a tube and you hand it to people who can create certain strong emotional states. What they found was that when people got angry, the DNA inside the tube was killed. Now think about that. That's someone else's DNA that got killed. But when people feel love, the DNA actually rewound and healed molecules that were already dead. And this is measured by how much light they can absorb, because DNA absorbs light. So the particular wavelength he was using was 260 nanometers, and the amount of light at 260 that is absorbed by the DNA shows whether it's alive or dead. So when it's alive, it absorbs a lot of 260, and when it's dead, the 260 doesn't make it. So this is really amazing, because now we have absolute proof that your consciousness is taking disassembled DNA that's all spread out, and it's actually rearranging the pieces and putting it back together, like Lazarus, like this idea of raising from the dead, ascension. The functions that we need to understand that create light body, they're already here. The light is the real key. The light is the soul. The photons are part of who you really are. They have your signature on them, and they're hanging out in your body. But because, think about it, every single part of your body is filled with cells, and those cells have DNA. That means your entire body has a ghostly light form that is also going to be there. So this is direct DNA evidence supporting Burlakov's fish study. It demonstrates that vital energy can be transferred between human beings, and of course the idea that angry and aggressive people can absorb other people's vital energy. So someone else's DNA withers in your anger's presence. So you really got to think about that you are actually killing cells in someone's body if you try to attack them and act aggressively and be confrontational, and you want them to become sad, and you want them to be scared, you want them to feel ashamed of themselves. You're actually bankrupting their health. You're sucking energy out of them. This dog is just doing whatever it wants, walking around like he owns the place. All right. So this may be a genetic holdover. I already said this, so we'll just go through it quickly. The survival of the fittest, in which the more aggressive species succeeds by absorbing energy from the weak. Alpha male is drawing vital energy. We talked about that. And teams more likely to win at home games. We talked about that. Now, is all stress bad? Is all this negative stuff that happens to us and these things that kind of weaken our DNA and break apart our cells, is that all bad? No. It creates ascension. Stress is the universe's way to create massive spring-loaded spiritual growth out of nowhere. So don't necessarily feel bad if you're going through something that's really difficult. It may be your ascension booster rocket. And there's genetic evidence for that. So part of preparing for ascension is understanding that stress is not the enemy. You want to work through it. You don't want to stay in stress. But the stress creates conditions that actually create liftoff for the ascension. So let's go back to this disgusting worm. And believe me, I'm going to show you some pictures of it. And even this little guy is probably not going to want to run around the room anymore once he sees it. Avert your eyes. Okay, so the Caenorhabditis is normally a lactose-intolerant microorganism. So it can't eat milk sugar. That's basically what that means. So then, what do these lovely scientists do? They drop these lactose-intolerant organisms into a lactose-only environment. And of course, most of them die, right? Because they have nothing to eat and they can't eat lactose. So before they die, you think they're going through stress? Absolutely. They're starving. They're hungry. They can't make it. But here's where science tells us something really strange happens, because a small percentage of them actually live through it. Now, wait a minute. The lactose can't fit in their mouth. Their mouth isn't shaped right to eat lactose. So how the hell did they survive? They physically can't get it into their mouth. Their body is not wired. It's not made to digest the stuff. What they actually found when they looked down at the minute level is that these species suddenly evolved, and that the actual shape of their mouth parts suddenly changed to be able to eat the lactose. Okay, now David, fuck you, David. You're trying to think about this, connect the dots. I'll help you. 969 cells in the Caenorhabditis, right? 24,000 genes. How many genes do we have? 34,000. So how much genetically different are we from the Caenorhabditis? Only 10,000 genes apart. So if they can do this to themselves, then what happens to the human being? Why couldn't we do something like this? Well, clearly, because the worm is so much smaller, because it only has 969 cells, it's actually possible to do a more rapid, sudden genetic rewrite. Because you have 50 plus trillion cells in your body, you can't necessarily rewrite your DNA quite that fast. But this proves that DNA, by its very nature, can be rewritten in the presence of stress. So here's the pictures where I'm going to show you the mouth. It's not that bad. It kind of looks like peyote cactus, and of course none of us here have ever done any psychedelic drugs. So here's the mouth, and that actual shape of the mouth changes. This is the one that really looks like, I don't know about you, that totally to me looks like psychedelic peyote cactus. And so who knows, maybe the worm is just tripping all the time and it's just somehow rewriting its own DNA in the course of a psychedelic fugue. I have no idea. The point is, though, that I'm showing you this structure to illustrate that the ones who survived, they actually changed the shape of their body that is supposed to be fixed in that form. Now, here's another really weird one. Certain life forms that heal their own DNA by drawing out of the pure information from the universe. And we're going to talk about the Drosophila fruit fly. This is another really interesting one. Here's a Drosophila with its normal eyes as they would appear. Scientists have been screwing around with the fruit fly for, over 100 years in laboratories because it's very simple and it's expendable. Nobody's going to get all bent out of shape about torturing little fruit flies, at least unless they're people at this conference, in which case the bleeding heart liberals and ooh, I'm not going there. So it's the most frequently studied insect in science. What they do in these studies is they take the first cell, the original fertilized cell that made the embryo, and they splice out the code that makes the eyes. They remove it, which you would think would make it so that the eyes are going to be gone forever, because now there's no code to make eyes, right? And in the gene-based model, you have to have that code for the eyes. But instead, you have the first generation, as we expect, the fly doesn't have its eyes, but no matter what they've ever done, and they also breed it with other fruit flies who have the same modification. So we know the gene makes eyes, but somehow, no matter how they do it, after no more than 5 generations maximum, that's not very many, the eyes always come back. So this, it never takes more than 5 generations. Check this out. That on the left is a fruit fly that's had its eyes bred out. No matter what they've ever done, the eyes come back. Now, how is that happening? It can't be in the genes. But we've already seen how Budakovsky took the hologram of a healthy raspberry plant, zapped it into a tumor, and rewrote the tumor cells. We've already seen how DNA is absorbing light. We've already seen that the light can carry the genetic code. So that means that around us in the room right now are photons that will tell you how to build a fruit fly if there's a fruit fly here. And if the fruit fly is missing its eyes, it's going to tell the fruit fly how to bring its eyes back. So one of the things I'm asking you to consider is that the photons that are telling your body how to ascend and how to metamorphosize into a new form, they're around us right now. But because you're not as small as a Caenorhabditis and you have a lot more than 969 cells, you already are ascending, and I'm going to have some really cool information on that, showing the genetic proof that it's happening to you. Now, here's another one that's really going to kind of cap off the whole discussion, the so-called immortal jellyfish, which throws even more of our assumptions out the window. Turritopsis nutricula. Now, this is just a fun fact I pulled off the internet. Jellyfish and lobsters are considered biologically immortal. They won't age and will never die unless they are killed. Yes, that's true. Now, this is the life cycle of a jellyfish. It goes through some very strange phases here. And the phases include the sperm and the egg, as you see on the top right. And then it goes to the planula, which is then a polyp, which sticks itself into the ground. The polyp becomes a cyphistoma, where it starts to grow these little tendrils. And then it goes to a strobila, in which it gets layers. The strobila layers then break off and turn into medusas, which then become jellyfish. So that's basically how it works, and we don't need to go into a whole lot more informational depth than that. Here's what this little guy looks like. It's only the size of your pinky fingernail, so it's very small. But what has happened with this thing is totally freaking bizarre, because, as we're about to see here, let's get the slides up. Christian Sommer, a German marine biology student on the Italian Riviera in 1988, was snorkeling and gathering these little jellyfish in plankton nets. And what he found was that the Turritopsis refused to die. No matter how smashed up its body was, the raw material, the actual cells, would reabsorb back into each other and revert back into an embryo. It appeared that it was aging in reverse. Okay? That's immortality. That's ascension. That's the transformation of the body. And it's already happening on the genetic level. The paper was first published in 1996. Then, more recently, we have this Japanese guy, Shin Kubota of Kyoto University's Seto Marine Biological University. Studied this starting in 1979, so he was probably first, but they found it independently. He found a scarlet jellyfish that had many spikes stuck in its body in a plankton net. And he removed the spikes, hoping that the jellyfish would recover, but instead it folded in upon itself and reverted back to its original embryonic polyp state. So if you saw my talk at Conscious Life Expo in January, here's the guy, and Shin Kubota, and here's his book. And just to show you how dedicated he is when he does a conference, he is willing to dress up in this crazy outfit. He really wants you to know some valuable information with that. So this is pretty trippy because here's the cycle that we see. You have these medusas going around, you smash it up, but it actually turns back into an undifferentiated cyst that buds off and creates new plants. Why couldn't this be happening to us? It's a basic part of biological life. And these little jellyfish are doing that. So then the final capstone, which you guys have probably heard me say plenty of times if you've read my books or gone to my talks, is how you actually make DNA completely out of nothing, where no DNA had existed before. And of course, this brings us to Dr. Montagnier, who won a Nobel Prize for discovering the AIDS virus. The HIV, well, AIDS is actually a series of symptoms, but it's related to HIV. So he discovered the HIV virus. He certainly has earned his street cred as a professional biologist. But in 2011, he came out with research showing that he could take water and make DNA grow in it, even if it was in a sealed container. And it's sterilized. And as I love to say, anybody who sits around with a bunch of test tubes and can look condescendingly at you over the top of his glasses clearly knows what he's talking about. All right, so here's the setup. You got a tube with DNA in it. That's what's on the left there. Then he puts it next to a series of tubes that have just plain water. He wraps a coil around it, which has 7 hertz electrical current going through it. And then he lets it sit like that for 18 hours. The tubes, after 18 hours, that have nothing but plain water in them, and they're capped off and they're sterilized, he finds DNA growing inside the water. DNA has grown. So that right there changes everything because it resolves the old chicken and the egg dispute. Which came first, the DNA or the energy that makes the DNA? The answer is it's the energy that makes the DNA. The energy that makes the DNA can take simple hydrogen and oxygen, the most simple molecules we have. Water is very simple, and can grow DNA in it, which means it's actually rearranging those molecules somehow. This just trips me out to no end. That's why I always try to talk about it, because we're surrounded by water. And so this has huge implications. So again, just to review very quickly, 2 hermetically sealed tubes. One has trace amounts of DNA in it. The other one does not. They get electrified. The electricity is the key because it's vibrating the DNA, and it sends out those photons. The vibration, the magnetic vibration, is what releases those stored photons. When those photons that make that DNA hit the water says, oh, I'm supposed to be making DNA now. And the photons actually rearrange the code. That's really amazing. So DNA appears to be a quantum field effect that does not require other life to exist first. And life forms are arranging spontaneously. Now here's another example of this, in which the Russians found plankton on the window of the space station, and they tried to figure out how the heck could it get up there, because there's not supposed to be any life in space. It's supposed to be a dead, empty void. Well, the Russian cosmonaut Solyoviev thinks that the plankton was blown up into space from air currents on Earth. No, dude. Come on. Give me a break. Now, this one is a big mouthful. Ultrastructural and light microscopy analysis of sapobions, formation, and growth in vitro. Whoa! What's that all about? This guy's Professor Pacheco. This was actually a replication of one of a series of studies that was done by Wilhelm Reich, and probably something, if you've seen very much of my talks, you know about this. But it's awesome to put it in right now. If you take regular beach sand and you put the sand into a test tube and then let this stuff rise up to the top, there will be like this little kind of filmy material that comes up to the top. You scrape it off, you look at it under the microscope, and you get these little blobs. It doesn't look like anything. If, however, you sterilize the sand first, you heat it up so that it's white hot, 1,000 degrees Celsius, then at that level of heat, when you scrape it off and you look at it after 24 hours under a microscope, you see living things. Now, the only thing that's in that test tube is sand and water, but these are actual photographs of the life forms that grew inside the water, including these sea vegetables. Now, they've been broken up, and the roots have gotten broken off, and the leaves have gotten broken off as they made it to the microscopic slide, but they're growing in there. And there's no way that they should be. But yet you see there's complex biological structure here. And so in some of the shows on Gaia, I have multiple examples of how this has been done. It's been done in a whole different variety of configurations, mineral preparations, different types of minerals, different types of starters. In this case, the starter is just sand that's been sterilized. The sterilization creates a pure silicon, so the sand just gets reverted to its original silicon state. And this looks like a white blood cell, but here we have what looks like the beginning of a shellfish, which we see some of the calcium deposits starting to grow that will make the shell. And then in this one, we really see that the seashell is starting to grow, because you can actually see how it's starting to wrap its way around the soft body. And you can see the point where the bottom of the shell would be. But the favorite one of all for me is this guy. As I've so often said, he's like the sea porcupine. You can see he has a head and a mouth, and he has an advanced defense system, so that if any of these other little things that are growing in that sterilized beach sand and water try to eat him, they're not going to have good luck. So I asked this question. Let's say, for example, that his DNA has the same amount of genes as the roundworm, 24,000. Where the heck did his 24,000 genes come from? Where did his DNA come from? There's energy around us right now that's going to make him wherever there's beach sand and water. Those photons are around us right now. The photons that will make you ascend are around us right now. They're activating our DNA and activating our ascension right now. Your DNA is absorbing photons all the time. Even as you sit here, your body is happily doing this. It's absorbing light constantly. You just don't usually notice it. And we don't have a way to tell. It's just the light that's inside of us has to do with our level of inspiration. So some of these scientists, such as a group in Japan, discovered that people who had sickness in certain parts of their bodies, that there was less light in the areas where the tissue is damaged. And as the tissue heals, the light comes back. What the heck is acupuncture? Acupuncture is people saying that they have to put little needles into your certain meridians, and stimulating a meridian over here or in your hand or something activates an organ system and sends light into the organ system. Well, acupuncture has been studied scientifically, and it turns out that the exact areas that the Chinese discovered however many thousand years ago were the acupuncture points are actually the areas of the largest amount of electrical charge on the skin. So they somehow knew that, and I believe that's the result of, again, extraterrestrials. So now that I've built up this new life science for you, and I've taken that direction, I want to switch gears now, and this is another really big part of the whole ascension discussion that I'm going to, you're going to see how much this factors in. It's a big, big scientific payoff. So let's take a look at fractals now. I'm going to show you some really, really cool stuff. This is the Mandelbrot set. It was discovered by a scientist who was analyzing the behavior of electrical signals in telephone wires. And I believe it was AT&T was trying to figure out why there's static in certain areas of the country in the telephone electrical wiring grid. And he plotted out where the faults were and did it over a huge, huge area. And when he put all that data together, he got this graph. So that has to do somehow with where the static is going and why does it build up in certain places. Then he's walking down the hall where he's working at MIT, and he looks in the window of another room, and on the chalkboard is the same illustration. But in this case, it has to do with the fluctuation between rabbit and fox populations. The rabbits eat the foxes eat the rabbits. Well, no, that's not true. The rabbits don't eat foxes. So it's been a long frickin' weekend, you guys. Wow. Going into a trance state now. Anyway, you know what fractals are. Let's just zoom into that sucker. So there's self-similarity at all levels. This one is fairly good, but this next image that I found is really good. Check this out. So this is some kind of function that just iterates and iterates and iterates. And notice the same image, like right there, boom, there's another one. You zoom in more and more and more, and no matter how far in you go, you keep seeing the same structures, the same patterns repeating again and again and again. And there's no limit to how much you can zoom in. There it is again, boom. And you just keep zooming into the tiniest little portion. And it comes back, and it comes back, and it comes back. So what I'm saying is that you are literally looking at how the universe was created. The universe fractalized out from a singular point. And as you look at this and you see how far fractals can go, it actually starts to make sense that the whole entire universe could be built under a system like this. So what is the original fractal? What is the original form? What is the Mandelbrot set when we look at the universe? Well, one of the keys that helps us is that you can fractalize geometry as well. So we're looking at the example right now with star shapes. And when I trigger this animation, you can see that, in fact, you can fractal out stars. So geometry can do the same thing. You can zoom in indefinitely on geometry, and it'll just give you more and more. So this is my argument, and if you've been following my work, and everybody here has, or at least most of you have, then you know that the sacred geometry has been a big, big part of this. And what I like to obsess on is these 5 forms. The tetrahedron, which if you look up now, there's 4 lights on the wall here, which happen to be tetrahedron lights. So that's really cool. That's one of the things I really like about lecturing in this room. It always kind of reminds me of that. The octahedron, the cube, the icosahedron, and the dodecahedron. Now, these are all fractals of each other. And another way to say that is that they all nest inside of each other. Each one of them grows out of one of the others. And they all grow out of each other. So I'll show you how this works. And it doesn't require any science. It's just a visual that you can see. You can fit a cube and a dodec together. So you got this 5-sided geometry that's light green, and then you got the 8-sided geometry, or the 4-sided per face, with the cube there. So each cube, if you look at the top, you see it looks like a little rooftop, like a little house. You just put a rooftop on each of the faces of the cube, and you're done. You got a dodec, just like that. So now we're going to look at, you can see now how those 2 shapes, cube and dodecahedron, 2 of the 5, they fit together so beautifully. The tetrahedron fits beautifully inside the cube. And here's how that works. Notice that there's no overlap. All you're doing is you're taking 4 of the 8 corners of the cube and connecting the dots together diagonally across the cube face. And you get that tetrahedron, just like we see it in the chandeliers here. And then you can put 2 of them together, and that makes the Merkaba. And we're going to talk a lot about this in a minute, because this is actually the key to understanding the universe. The Merkaba is everything. Then we can take the octahedron and fit it inside the tetrahedron beautifully by just connecting the dots like we see right here. So that Merkaba has the octahedron inside of it. And then, last but not least, this is the really tricky one, the hardest one to see, is how the icosahedron fits inside the octahedron. This is where you got to kind of do something strange. You can't just bisect the middle now. You got to do it off to the side. So you see now how there's an equilateral triangle on each of the 8 sides of the octahedron. But you'll notice that we're making now this kind of funny triangle inside each face that's sort of offset by what looks like maybe 30 degrees. And you make those offset triangles on each face and then connect the dots, and inside you get this octahedron. So notice also, you can see it here, and you could also see it in the previous illustration, that the geometry tilts. It's like a rotational vortex type of movement. There's a tilt angle on the icosahedron compared to the octa. It goes whoop and goes off to the side. Here's another visualization of it, another way that we can see this. The icosahedron inside the octahedron. So then again, here's that little weird triangle that I said is offset. And the funny part is that you get this classic ratio. And you all are so cool, I don't even need to say it. It's the Fibonacci.
Doorways, megalithic.
I have no words. Apparently, no words. I guess these wireless mics broadcast really well, but since I'm not wireless, we can just mute that wireless mic on the mixing board, and hopefully that will solve the problem, because we're getting interference from somebody else's wireless mic. I think that's what it is, which shows the energy is really good out here. It's broadcasting over quite a long distance. So look, all it is you take the length of the entire side, that's a 1. You take the length of where the sacred cut is, right? And that's a 0.618. That's your Fibonacci, your golden mean. So all of these things that are the regulation of life and growth and development, it's written right into the geometry itself, which that, to me, just really trips me out and is very, very cool. Okay. Now, last but not least, the dodeca and the icosahedron, that's an easy one. Because really, it's just flipping it inside out. You can see it very clearly how well they fit together. There's a pentagonal theme in both. And it works, and it fits, meshes very, very nicely. And we see, you know, in this illustration, just another example of the same thing. So all of them nest together, and they're all fractal, right? So think about this. You can take that same principle of fractals and zooming through things and show how you could zoom through this just by expanding them. Like if you expand the amount of energy that they have, the size that they have, you pump them up, and they twist, and as the lines continue changing, you can ratchet one shape into another. And that's a very, very important point. And here's where it gets even more trippy. All you have to do is use spheres. You take individual spheres that are all the same size, and then you start putting them together, and that's called close packing. So this whole science of close packed spheres, how many spheres can you fit together as tightly as possible? What you're seeing here is the Merkaba made of close packed spheres. All the same geometry I was showing you, it's just a function of spheres. There's another Merkaba made out of spheres. Here's the octahedron made out of spheres, and here's another example. And then what we have is the octahedron with the cube around it, again, all made out of spheres. You add more spheres, and then you get this. Now you got your icosahedron, dodecahedron, and you can invert it. So this actually shows that the universe is building, this is my interpretation, is the universe is building little spheres of energy. And those little spheres pack together, they're attracted to each other, and they form this geometry, and this is the basis of all reality. It fractalizes out. So this comes to us now, this idea that the universe could be built from this stuff is a great scientific, it's part of a great scientific breakthrough that, in my view, changes everything that we thought we knew. And you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, by now. If not, this is going to blow your doors off. But it had to be mentioned. And you're going to hear some new things about that I discovered only at the last talk. So only if you saw the last talk will this be familiar to you. That was the one I did at Conscious Life Expo. If you haven't seen it, this is going to rock your world. It did for me. So this came out in 2013.